This is Jessica with CutesieCrafts.com. Today I've got a video showing a compilation of some of these embroidery stitches, and they are the ones that I think most beginner embroiderers should know. If you want the full videos, I have links to each of those in the description below. Each one of the stitches that I'm going to show you in the video is secured in the back with a knot. So make sure before you start that you have your needle threaded on with a short tail of about 4 or 5 inches on one side and then a knot in the longer end. So that way, when you bring your needle up through the back of your work, it's always secure in the back so you can start stitching.
Start a running stitch by bringing your needle up through the back of your work and then moving 1 stitch length forward back to the back of your hoop, and then go 1 more stitch length forward, bring the needle back up, and then another stitch length forward and bring the needle back down. And you want the space between your stitches to be similar to the length of your actual stitches. And get it as close as you can. It's not going to be perfect, but that's what makes hand embroidery look so unique, is that it wasn't done by a machine. And just continue along the line until you get to the end. For the back stitch, you want to bring your thread up from the back, and just like the running stitch, we're going to go 1 stitch forward, and then we're going to skip a stitch length and bring our needle up through the back again. But instead of moving forward like we did with the running stitch, we're going to move back, hence the name, the back stitch, and come back down through the hole that you previously went up in on that last stitch. And so continue doing that. Move forward a stitch coming in from the back, and then move backwards a stitch going down into the same hole from that last stitch. To do a split stitch, bring your needle from the back to the front. Go 1 stitch length forward. And just like the name suggests, the next stitch you're going to come up through the back, but you're going to split the middle of the previous stitch. So come right up through the middle of that thread. And then go another stitch length forward, and then come up through the middle of that stitch. And sometimes at the end of my split stitch, depending on what look I'm going for, this last stitch, every other stitch is split and that one isn't. So I like to go back and split that one and then just end right here at the end of that previous stitch. To do a stem stitch, bring your needle up through the back, and then this first stitch you're going to want to make kind of a little bit longer than you normally would, just a little bit. And then before pulling your thread all the way down, you want to bring the needle up at the halfway point between where you came up and where you went down. And then pull that up. And then you will go now a shorter stitch length forward, just a normal stitch length. And then before bringing that down, you want to bring your needle up through the hole that your first stitch length went down into. And then pull that up. And you'll notice I'm keeping my thread is coming out on the same side every time. So let me show you. So I'm doing 1 stitch length forward, bringing my needle up through that last hole, and I'm pulling the thread away this way rather than bringing it under and going that way. And at the end here, before I do my last stitch, I kind of like to do just one stitch and leave just a tiny bit left that I need to do, so shorter than I would normally do my stitch. So that's a normal stitch length there. And then for the last stitch, it's going to be really short, so just about up to there. I feel like that makes it blend a little bit more seamlessly to make one constant line. To do the chain stitch, bring your needle up through the back of the fabric, and then you're going to take your needle back down through that same hole that you just came up through. And you want to leave a little loop there. And then you're going to go one stitch length forward coming up from the back and bring your needle up through the center of this loop here. And then don't pull it too tight because you want that loop to stay there so you can see it. And then same thing, you're going to go back down through the hole that you just came out of, and that's going to be in the inside of that last stitch this time. And leave a loop. Come one stitch length forward and make sure that that comes up through the center of that loop. And then give it a little tug, but not too tight. And then for your last stitch, go ahead and go back down like you normally would. Come up through the center of your loop. And then you're just going to secure that last stitch by going down slightly away from where you came up out of. And that just secures your last stitch right there. To do a straight stitch, you bring your needle up through the back on one side of the line. And then it's really simple. You just bring your needle back down through the other side. Just a straight across stitch. Normally they're smaller than that, but that's all it is. To do a French knot, bring your needle up through the spot where you would like your knot to be. And then you're going to take your needle and point it away from your work. And you're going to wrap your thread around once and twice, and then turn your needle. Make sure you're holding onto this end here and go back down in or near the same hole that you came out of. And the whole time you want to make sure that you're holding this tightly, but not too tight, because then you'll get too tight of a knot here for your needle to go back through. So just kind of hold it a little taut there, and then bring your needle back down through the other side with your other hand, and then go ahead and pull that and make sure you're holding onto this left side still. I got some of my fabric there. And then once you get to about that point, you can let go, and then just give that a tiny little tug there to make sure that it's straight. So again, bring your needle up through the back, pointing away from your work, wrap the needle once, twice, go back down near the same hole that you came up through, hold with your left hand this thread over here and push the needle down here, and then pull it through the back. Make sure you're continuing to hold with your left. And then when you get to about here, you can let go, and you've got a nice French knot. To do a lazy daisy stitch, you're going to bring your needle up through the pointed end of your shape, and then you're going to take your needle and go back down through that same hole that you just came up through. And then at the end of your shape, the curved end right here, before pulling this part down, you want to bring your needle up through the end of the curved end, and then make sure it goes to the inside of this loop here. And don't pull it too tight, because you want to make sure that it has that teardrop shape. And then you're going to go just a tiny little bit forward from that hole that you just came out of, just to secure the end of that teardrop shape. And for making an actual daisy for the flower, you're going to start in the middle of your flower. And all we're doing are just a bunch of lazy daisy stitches around this center point. So we came up, bring our needle back through that same point. Make sure you keep a loop above the fabric. Bring your needle up through the end of the petal. Make sure it's coming up through the inside of this loop here. And give it a little tug, just a tiny little tug. And then a tiny stitch forward to secure the end. And then you come back up through that same spot in the middle, and you do that over and over again for each of the petals on your flower. To do a blanket stitch, bring your thread up through the back of your work, and then you're going to go from this hole one stitch length forward and then up, so at a diagonal right here. But leave a loop and don't pull it all the way through, and then from this hole down back to your line, you'll bring your needle up from the back, and then what that's going to do is catch that loop there and make kind of an L shape for your first stitch. And then you're going to continue, so from here, go up to making that diagonal again. Come down from that stitch, back down to your bottom line, and through this loop to catch that. And then to end the blanket stitch, just do a tiny little stitch just shortly away from where your needle's coming up out of, just to secure that end right there. To do a woven wheel stitch, start out with a lot more floss than you normally would. This is going to take a lot. Start from the end of one of these lines and follow that line to bring your needle back down to the center. Continue to do that for each of these lines. You should have an odd number of lines. Once you have all of your lines, go ahead and bring your needle up near the center, but not in the center. And what we're going to do is a weaving pattern all around the entire wheel, hence the name woven wheel. So we're going to be going over this line and under this one, over this one, under this one. So let me just show you. So we're going over that and under this one, and pull the thread all the way through. We're going to go over this one and under this one, over this one, under this one. So then you'll notice that every time you go around, you're alternating which ones you're going over and under. So last time we went under this one, and now we're going over it. As you're stitching this, be careful that you also don't pull your thread too tight, otherwise it's going to end up going underneath your work. You want it to be secure, but not so tight that it's going to distort your shape that you're making. Once you've covered up all of those lines, go ahead and go to the one that you would have gone under again, and bring your needle through to the back instead of going under. To do a fishbone stitch, bring your needle up from the back at the top of the leaf And then go down the center line, kind of a longer stitch length depending on what look you're going for. And then you're going to bring your needle up on the right hand side following this curve here, so just slightly to the right and below. And then you'll bring it down slightly below the end of this first stitch on this center line here. And then go over to the left side of the leaf following this left curve here. And then back down the center line slightly below the last stitch that you did. So continue, do one on the right. Down to the center line. And then on the left. And then just continue that pattern right and left till you get all the way down the center line to fill in the entire shape. To do a satin stitch, I first like to draw some directional lines to show me which way my stitch is going to be going. That's especially helpful if you're doing a curved shape like a flower petal. But you start by bringing your thread up through the back, and all you're going to be doing is you're going to be coming in from the back on one side and then going down into the fabric on the other side over and over again until you've filled in the shape. And so what I first like to do when I start stitching is break the satin stitch up into sections. Again, this is really helpful if you are doing a curved shape. And then what I like to do is go back in between each of these sections and split them in half again with another stitch. But all this does is it helps me keep my stitches more even. You don't have to do it this way, but I struggled with the satin stitch for a long time and this really helped. And then once you finish that section, you can start on another section. And then just keep going like that. To do a bullion knot, bring your needle up through one side of where you would like your knot to be, and then bring it back down on the other end of where you would like it to be. Leaving a large loop on top of your fabric, bring your needle up again through where you first brought it up. But don't pull it all the way through. Now you'll want to take this thread here and start wrapping it around your needle and pushing it down. And you want the length of your wrapping here to be the same length as your knot is going to be. So from this hole to this hole here. So once you think you've got it about the right size, take your thumb and your pointer finger and hold lightly and make sure that your wrapping's not too tight, because otherwise you won't be able to pull your needle through. But go ahead and hold the wraps here with your left hand, and then with your right hand gently pull the needle up through the inside of the wrapping. You can see I got mine a little bit tight there, so it was kind of hard to pull through. This stitch takes a lot of practice to get it right, and I'm honestly still learning how to do it myself. But you'll get to that point there after you've pulled it enough and make it so that that end disappears. And then you're going to take your needle and go back down in the end right there. And I've got a successful bullion knot. So bring your needle up on one side, bring it down on the other, leave a large loop, bring your needle up through this side, but don't pull it through. Wrap it around several times, squish it down, until it's about the length that you need. Hold it with your thumb and your pointer finger and pull the needle through. And then once you finish, bring your needle back down at the end.
And then once you've learned these basic embroidery stitches, you can take them and make beautiful works of art using different stitches to make up the images. Head over to my blog, cutesy crafts.com, for tons of free embroidery patterns and lots of fun craft ideas.